story. The autumn sun cast shadows across the manicured lawn of 1542 Maple Drive as Richard Thorne's sensible Honda Accord pulled into the driveway. The car, like everything else in his carefully curated life, had been chosen for its ability to blend in, a perfectly average vehicle for a supposedly perfectly average middle manager. Richard adjusted his unremarkable tie, the kind you'd find on clearance at any department store, and gathered his worn leather briefcase from the passenger seat. At 43, his face carried the subtle lines of someone who smiled often but worried more, his salt and pepper hair trimmed in a conservative cut that wouldn't raise eyebrows in any suburban office park. The neighborhood around him buzzed with the usual Tuesday evening activities. Mrs. Peterson next door watered her prized roses, offering a friendly wave that Richard returned with practiced warmth. 2 houses down, the Williams kids chased each other on their bikes, their shrieks of laughter carrying across perfectly maintained lawns. It was all so ordinary, so deliberately mundane, exactly as Richard had designed it. Inside his briefcase, beneath routine operational reports and mundane meeting minutes, lay documents that would make most of his neighbors' jaws drop. Quarterly reports showing that RT Holdings, his carefully anonymous corporate entity, owned 78% of Apex Innovation shares. The company's latest valuation would put his personal worth well into the billions, but that information was known only to a select few members of the board of directors and his trusted executive assistant, Patricia Martinez. As he approached his front door, the first hint that something was amiss prickled at his senses. The house felt different, hollow somehow. Usually, by this time, the sounds of his daughter Madeline's latest pop music obsession would be thumping through the walls, accompanied by her dramatic teenage singing. The kitchen windows should have been steamy from Grace's cooking, the scent of her signature Tuesday lasagna wafting through the evening air. Instead, silence greeted him, the kind of silence that made his stomach tighten with instinctive unease. The key turned in the lock with its familiar click, but the sound seemed to echo more than usual in the unusually still house. "Hello?" Richard called out, his voice bouncing off the walls. No response. He stepped into the foyer, his well-worn dress shoes clicking against the hardwood floors. The first thing he noticed was the stack of moving boxes in the living room, their cardboard surfaces pristine and newly assembled. These weren't the leftover boxes from their move to this house 5 years ago, which still cluttered their attic. These were fresh, their folds still crisp, their surfaces unmarked by time. "Grace?" he called again, moving further into the house. The living room looked strange, items missing from their usual places. The silver-framed wedding photo that had sat on the mantel for 19 years was gone. The handmade pottery bowl Madeline had created in 7th grade art class, the one Grace had insisted on displaying despite, or perhaps because of, its charmingly lopsided shape, had vanished from its place on the coffee table. Richard's hand instinctively reached for his phone, but before he could pull it from his pocket, the distinctive sound of the garage door's mechanical whir broke the silence. Through the kitchen window, he caught sight of something that seemed jarringly out of place in their modest driveway. The gleaming grille of a Rolls-Royce Phantom, its polished surface reflecting the setting sun like liquid silver. His fingers tightened around his briefcase handle, knuckles whitening beneath the skin. In all his years of careful anonymity, of deliberately flying under the radar, he developed an almost sixth sense for when something was about to shatter his carefully constructed facade. Right now, that sense was screaming. The garage door completed its ascent with a final mechanical groan, and Richard stood rooted in place, watching through the kitchen window as the luxury vehicle maneuvered into their driveway with practiced precision. The car's deep burgundy paint job probably cost more than what his neighbors believed he made in a month. Its presence here, in front of his deliberately modest home, felt like a tear in the fabric of the reality he'd so carefully woven. From his vantage point, Richard could see the profiles of the car's occupants through its tinted windows. Even before the driver's doors swung open with theatrical slowness, he recognized the silhouette behind the wheel, the perfectly coiffed hair, the aggressive set of the shoulders that he'd observed in countless sales meetings. Bradley Cooper, Apex's golden boy, the man who'd strutted into the company 3 years ago and proceeded to break every sales record in the books. The same man who, Richard knew from his position of carefully concealed authority, had been making increasingly risky moves in recent months, leveraging future commissions in ways that made the board nervous. But it wasn't Bradley's presence that made Richard's blood run cold. It was the familiar figure in the passenger seat, Grace, his wife of 20 years, wearing an outfit he'd never seen before. An outfit that, even from this distance, screamed of designer boutiques and price tags with two mini zeros. The sound of teenage laughter, his daughter's laughter, drifted from the back seat, and Richard felt something in his chest constrict. He remained motionless in the kitchen, watching as his carefully constructed world began to unravel through a window streaked with the last rays of daylight. In that moment, as the Rolls-Royce's engine purred to a stop and its doors began to open, Richard Thorne, billionaire in disguise, master of the silent empire, felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: the cold, creeping sensation of losing control. The Rolls-Royce's doors opened with a soft, expensive click that seemed to echo in the suburban quiet. Bradley Cooper emerged first, unfolding his 6'2" frame from the driver's seat with the practiced grace of someone who knew they were always being watched. His suit, a bespoke Italian creation in charcoal gray, caught the evening light, the fabric alone worth more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. Through the kitchen window, Richard observed the scene unfolding in his driveway with the detached fascination of someone watching a car crash in slow motion. Bradley moved around the car with the confidence of a man who believed he owned not just the vehicle, but the very ground he walked on. His perfect white teeth flashed in a smile as he opened the passenger door with a flourish. Grace emerged like a butterfly from a chrysalis, but instead of the practical slacks and comfortable sweaters she usually wore to her job at the local library, she was dressed in what Richard immediately recognized as a Valentino dress, the kind that never made it to department store sales racks. The deep burgundy fabric matched the Rolls-Royce's paint job, a detail that felt too coordinated to be coincidental. Her honey blonde hair, usually pulled back in a simple ponytail, had been professionally styled, falling in elegant waves around her shoulders. "Bradley, darling," Grace's voice carried clearly through the evening air, holding a note of excitement Richard hadn't heard in years. "I still can't believe the realtor can show us the lakefront property tomorrow. Are you sure it's not too much trouble?" Bradley's laugh was rich and confident as he helped her out of the car. "Nothing's too much trouble for my future family." He pulled her close, his hand settling possessively on her waist. "Besides, what's the point of making money if you can't spend it on the people you love?" The back door of the Rolls-Royce flew open, and Madeline burst out, her energy radiating across the driveway. Richard's 14-year-old daughter had changed too. Gone were the ripped jeans and band t-shirts she'd insisted were the height of fashion just last week. In their place was an outfit that looked like it had walked straight off a teenage influencer's Instagram page. "Mom," Madeline twirled, her new designer sneakers scuffing against the concrete. "Can you believe Bradley's house has its own movie theater? Like, a real one, with actual theater seats and everything. And the pool. Oh my God, the pool. It's got underwater speakers." Underwater. Can you imagine having pool parties there? I'd be like the most popular girl in school. "That's the idea, princess," Bradley winked at her, using his free arm to pull Madeline into a group hug. "Just wait until your friends see where we're taking you next week. Paris in the fall is magical." Richard's fingers dug into his palms, leaving half-moon impressions in the skin. Paris. The trip he and Grace had always talked about, planned for, saved for. Maintaining the illusion of a middle manager's salary meant carefully budgeting for such luxuries. Now Bradley Cooper was casually dangling it like a shiny toy. "I can't wait to post pictures from the Eiffel Tower," Madeline gushed, pulling out her phone. A new model, Richard noticed, not the one she'd received for her birthday 2 months ago. "Sarah is going to literally die when she sees me having breakfast at those cute French cafes." Grace laughed, the sound both familiar and strange. "Well, that's what happens when you have someone successful in your life, honey. Bradley knows how to live properly, not like." She stopped abruptly, finally noticing Richard's presence in the doorway. The moment stretched like taffy, reality bending around the weight of unspoken words. Bradley was the first to break it, his smile never wavering as he looked directly at Richard. "Hey, Rich," he called out, his voice dripping with false camaraderie. Fancy meeting you here. Richard stepped out onto the driveway, his modest shoes scuffing against the concrete. The contrast between his intentionally middle-class appearance and the tableau before him couldn't have been starker. Just helping your girls move up in the world, Bradley continued, his arms still wrapped around Grace's waist. You know that defense contract I landed last week? The one you helped process the paperwork for? His air quotes were practically visible in his tone. $850 million. Commission's pretty sweet when you're not stuck pushing papers in middle management. Grace at least had the decency to look somewhat uncomfortable, but Madeline showed no such restraint. Dad, she rolled her eyes with all the dramatic flair of a teenager who believed she'd suddenly graduated to a higher social class. Why didn't you ever tell us Bradley was so amazing? He's taking us shopping at actual designer stores tomorrow. Designer stores, Dad? Not those awful outlet malls you always take us to. Now, Maddie, Bradley's voice took on a patronizing tone that made Richard's jaw clench. Your dad does his best. Not everyone can be a top performer. Some people are just meant to process paperwork. The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and choking. Grace shifted slightly, her new designer heels clicking against the driveway. Richard, we need to talk. But not right now. Bradley's taking us to dinner at La Maison. You know, that French restaurant downtown? The one you said was too expensive for our anniversary last year? Can't wait for my private jet life. Madeline bounced on her toes, high-fiving Bradley with practiced ease. Dad, you're such a loser. I can't believe we've been living like this when we could have had all this. She gestured at the Rolls-Royce, her new clothes, the general aura of wealth that Bradley wore like a second skin. Bradley's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Don't worry, Rich. I'll take good care of them. After all, what kind of man would I be if I didn't provide the best for my new family? He helped Grace and Madeline back into the car, each movement deliberate and showy. Oh, and Rich? Don't wait up. We might be late. You know how those business dinners can run long. The Rolls-Royce's engine purred to life, its sound inappropriately loud for the quiet suburban street. As the car backed out of the driveway, Richard caught a final glimpse of his daughter in the back seat, already absorbed in her phone, probably crafting the perfect social media post about her upgraded life. Grace sat in the passenger seat, deliberately looking straight ahead, her posture rigid with what might have been determination or guilt. The car disappeared down the street, leaving Richard standing alone in his driveway, surrounded by the comfortable mediocrity he'd chosen for himself, now feeling more like a prison than a disguise. The soft glow of Richard's monitor. The room, like the rest of the house, felt emptier now, though nothing had physically changed since that morning. The same degrees hung on the walls, legitimate credentials earned through years of hard work, displayed modestly in simple frames. The same family photos lined his desk, though looking at them now felt like studying artifacts from a different era. On his screen, financial records and contract histories scrolled past as he methodically reviewed Bradley Cooper's entire career at Apex Innovations. Each document told a piece of a story that was becoming increasingly clear and increasingly concerning. His phone buzzed, Patricia Martinez's name lighting up the display. Even at this hour, his executive assistant's voice was crisp and professional as it came through the speakerphone. Mr. Thorne, I've completed the deep dive you requested on Mr. Cooper's financial activities. Richard leaned back in his chair, his tie finally loosened after the long day. What did you find, Patricia? The numbers don't add up, Mr. Thorne. Patricia's voice carried the careful tone she used when delivering particularly sensitive information. Cooper's been operating entirely on leveraged deals. That defense contract he's so proud of? He used the projected commissions as collateral for personal loans. Multiple loans, actually, from different institutions. Richard's fingers drummed against his desk. How exposed is he? Completely. The sound of shuffling papers came through the speaker. He's been living on credit for months, using each new deal to secure loans to pay off previous loans. The interest rates are astronomical. One missed payment, and the whole structure collapses like a house of cards. And the defense contract itself? I've found some irregularities in the paperwork. Nothing that would have been caught in routine processing, but... Patricia paused. Sir, Did you know he's been promising the client services that aren't actually included in our standard package? Richard closed his eyes, remembering Bradley's boasting in the driveway. $850 million. The largest contract in company history, and it was built on sand. There's more, Patricia continued. About Mrs. Thorne. Tell me. The divorce papers will be served tomorrow. She's already transferred all joint accounts to her name, or tried to. The main accounts are protected, of course, given your arrangements. But the household account, the one you maintain for appearances? She emptied it this morning. Richard opened his eyes, focusing on a photograph on his desk. It showed him and Grace in their first apartment, sitting on a second-hand couch, both laughing at something long forgotten. She'd been wearing one of his old college sweatshirts, her hair pulled back in that simple ponytail he'd always loved. They'd had nothing then, nothing but trust, love, and a shared dream of building something meaningful. Mr. Thorne? Patricia's voice softened slightly. There's security footage from the office you should see. Cooper's been quite vocal about his plans, about his newfound family. A few keystrokes brought up the footage on Richard's monitor. Bradley Cooper, holding court in the break room, surrounded by admiring junior sales staff. Trading up, if you know what I mean. Bradley's recorded voice oozed confidence. Per guy doesn't even know what's hitting him. Middle management type, you know the sort. No ambition, no vision. The wife, though. He whistled appreciatively. She's got expensive tastes once you show her what she's been missing. And the kid? Already calling me Dad when he's not around. Richard's hand tightened around his mouse, but his voice remained steady. Patricia, I need you to prepare some documents for tomorrow's board meeting. We need to discuss risk management protocols for our sales department. Of course, sir. And Patricia hesitated. What about Detective Walsh? Should I arrange a meeting? Morgan Walsh, his old college roommate, now a financial crimes investigator. The man who'd helped Richard build his empire in secret, ensuring everything was legally bulletproof. Richard studied Bradley's face on the security footage, freeze-framed in a moment of smug triumph. In the background, he could see Grace walking past the break room, her new designer handbag clutched close, pretending not to hear as Bradley continued his boasting. Yes, Richard finally answered, his voice carrying the weight of decision. Set up the meeting with Morgan, but make it unofficial. I want to understand exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes before we make any moves. Patricia's typing could be heard through the speaker. Done. He can meet you tomorrow at 7 a.m. at the Corner Cup, your usual spot. And sir? She paused. The board meeting is scheduled for 10 a.m. Should I prepare the standard quarterly reports or prepare everything, Patricia? Every contract, every promise, every leverage deal. It's time for a complete audit. Richard's gaze drifted to another photo on his desk, Madeline's 13th birthday, just last year. She was wearing the handmade bracelet he'd helped her create in their garage workshop, proudly showing it off to the camera. Now that same wrist sparkled with whatever expensive trinket Bradley had bought her affection with. Very well, Mr. Thorne. Patricia's voice remained professionally neutral, but he could hear the underlying concern. Will you be attending virtually, as usual? Yes. RT Holdings needs to maintain its customary discretion. He allowed himself a small, grim smile. Even if others have forgotten the value of keeping up appearances. After ending the call, Richard pulled up Bradley's personnel file. The man's meteoric rise through Apex's sales department had been remarkable, too remarkable, in retrospect. Each successive deal larger than the last, each commission more extravagant. The numbers danced across his screen. Personal loans, credit lines, leveraged assets. A complex web of financial juggling that would make a circus performer dizzy. His computer chimed with an incoming email. A series of photographs from Apex's corporate security system. Bradley leading Grace through the executive parking garage, his hand possessively on her lower back. Madeline trailing behind them, engrossed in her new phone. The timestamp showed it was from 3 weeks ago, long before today's dramatic revelation. Richard opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside lay the anniversary gift he'd planned to give Grace next month, a simple silver locket containing a photo from their early days. The price tag would have fit his cultivated image of a middle manager splurging on a special occasion. Now it seemed like a relic from another life. His phone buzzed again. A text from Grace. "We need to talk about the house and other arrangements. Bradley's lawyer will be in touch." Bradley's lawyer. Not even the courtesy of hiring her own representation. Richard closed the message without responding and turned back to his computer. More security footage played across his screen. Bradley in the office, throwing around promises and commissions like confetti, building his house of cards higher and higher. "Patricia," he spoke into his phone one final time that night. "One more thing. Get me everything you can on Bradley's defense contract client. I want to know exactly what he promised them, down to the last detail." "Already on it, sir."
And
She hesitated. "I'm sorry about Mrs. Thorne and Madeline." Richard watched the final frames of security footage, where Bradley led his former family, toward that ostentatious Rolls-Royce, all of them dazzled by the gleam of fool's gold. "Don't be sorry, Patricia. Sometimes people need to learn the true value of things. One way or another." The clock on his wall ticked past 1 a.m. as Richard continued his silent vigil, watching his carefully constructed world shift on its axis. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: the board meeting, Morgan's investigation, the inevitable confrontations. But for now, in the quiet of his home office, surrounded by the evidence of betrayal and deception, Richard Thorne did what he'd always done best. He observed, he planned, and he waited. The familiar weight of his simple wedding band felt heavy on his finger as he closed the last file. Outside, the suburban night was silent, broken only by the distant sound of another car. Probably the Rolls-Royce returning from their extravagant dinner. Richard didn't move to look. Instead, he began composing an email to the board of directors, his fingers moving deliberately across the keyboard. Subject: Emergency Risk Assessment Meeting, Priority Level 1. The first dominoes were about to fall, and Richard Thorne, the silent emperor of his invisible empire, would make sure he controlled exactly how and where they landed. The morning sun barely touched the skyline of downtown as Detective Morgan Walsh stirred his third cup of coffee at the Corner Cup Cafe. His weathered face reflected 20 years of investigating financial crimes, each wrinkle a testament to another complex case. Today's meeting promised to add a few more. "Your usual booth is ready, Mr. Thorne," the elderly waitress called out as Richard entered, wearing the same intentionally modest suit from yesterday. If she noticed the shadows under his eyes or the slight tremor in his hands, she didn't mention it. Morgan watched his old college roommate slide into the booth, noting how Richard maintained his middle manager persona even here. "You look like hell, Rich," he said quietly, sliding a fresh coffee across the table. "Rough night." Richard's voice carried the weight of his sleepless hours. He pulled out a thick manila folder and placed it between them. "I need your expertise on this, Morgan." Unofficial capacity. Morgan opened the folder, his experienced eyes scanning the documents within. His eyebrows rose incrementally with each page turn. "Bradley Cooper," he read aloud. "Your rising star salesman." The one Grace, he caught himself, noting Richard's tightened jaw. "Sorry. Just tell me what you see." Morgan spread the papers across the table, creating a mosaic of financial statements, loan documents, and contract details. "This is..." He whistled low. "Rich, this guy's built a house of cards that would make Bernie Madoff blush. These loan structures..." He tapped one document. "He's using projected commissions as collateral. Not just from one deal, but layering them. Each new contract supports loans that pay off the previous ones." "The defense contract," Richard prompted. "That's the crown jewel, isn't it? $850 million. Morgan pulled out that particular set of documents. "But look here, these service promises. They're way beyond standard packages. Did your legal team review these?" "They never got the chance. Bradley has been creative with his paperwork routing." The waitress approached with more coffee, and both men fell silent until she left. Morgan leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Rich, one missed payment, one delayed contract, and this whole thing implodes. The interest rates alone." He shook his head. "And these personal expenses, the Rolls-Royce, the house, the trips. It's all leveraged on future earnings that depend on increasingly risky deals." Richard sipped his coffee, his face unreadable. The board meeting is in 2 hours. RT Holdings has expressed concerns about risk management. Morgan's eyes widened slightly at the mention of Richard's corporate alter ego. An audit? A complete review of all recent contracts. Richard's voice remained steady. I need to know. If his creditors were to receive certain information about the stability of these deals, they'd call in their loans immediately. Morgan gathered the documents, his movements precise. The defense contract would be the first to fall under scrutiny. These service promises, they're practically fraudulent. One phone call to the client about standard package limitations. Richard checked his watch, a modest Timex that cost less than Bradley probably spent on lunch. I have another meeting. Morgan, I need you to. Already on it. Morgan pulled out his own notepad. I'll make some discreet inquiries. Rich. He hesitated. Grace and Madeline. When this falls apart, they made their choice. Richard stood, straightening his unremarkable tie. Now they'll live with the consequences. The board meeting room at Apex Innovations buzzed with nervous energy. The quarterly profit projections glowed on the main screen, but everyone's attention was on the empty chair at the head of the table, the one reserved for the representative of RT Holdings. Bradley Cooper sat near the middle, his $1,000 suit slightly wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes betraying his own sleepless night. The defense contract folder sat before him like a shield. Ladies and gentlemen, the aged voice of RT Holdings representative crackled through the conference call speaker. We have concerns about recent risk management practices in our sales department. Bradley's confident smile faltered slightly. Sir, if this is about the defense contract, I can assure you, this is about all recent contracts, Mr. Cooper. The voice carried an edge that made several board members shift uncomfortably. We're initiating a complete audit of all sales activities from the past year. But that's, Bradley caught himself. Of course, whatever you think is necessary. Though I should mention, the client is expecting delivery of promised services next week, and any delay could. Promised services? Another board member leaned forward. What exactly was promised, Mr. Cooper? As Bradley fumbled through his folder, Richard watched through his secure video feed. His voice digitally altered as he spoke as the RT Holdings representative. On his second screen, emails began flooding in, Morgan's discreet inquiries bearing fruit faster than expected. The board meeting stretched into its second hour. Bradley's explanations grew increasingly desperate as each contract was examined, each promise scrutinized. By the time they reached the defense contract, his collar was damp with sweat. Mr. Cooper, Richard's altered voice cut through the room. Could you explain why this contract promises services that aren't part of our standard package? Services that would cost the company more than the contract's entire profit margin to deliver. The room fell silent. Bradley's hands shook as he reached for his water glass. There must be some mistake. If I could just... And these commission advances, another board member chimed in, reading from the newly distributed audit reports. You've already spent them? All of them. Bradley's phone buzzed, the first of many calls from his creditors. As he stared at the screen, his face went pale. The vote was unanimous. All contracts under review. All commissions frozen. All promises subject to legal examination. As Bradley stumbled out of the boardroom, his empire beginning to crumble, Richard ended his video call and opened his email. Morgan's latest update was brief. Creditors notified. Defense client reviewing contract terms. Dominoes are falling. Through his office window, Richard watched Bradley rush to his Rolls-Royce, phone pressed to his ear, his perfect suit now as rumpled as his future. Sometimes, Richard reflected, the biggest falls come from the highest purchase. The local news van parked outside Gill's Gas and Go cast harsh fluorescent light across Bradley Cooper's face as he restocked the snack shelves. His designer suit had been replaced by a polyester uniform with a name tag that read Brad, the material catching on his expensive watch, the last remnant of his former glory that hadn't been seized. Mr. Cooper, the reporter's voice carried across the empty parking lot. Any comment on the collapse of your contracts at Apex? The lawsuits from investors? The defense contract cancellation? Bradley ducked behind the chip display, but the camera lights followed him. Through the store window, he could see his own face on the news van's monitor, fall from grace. Top salesman's empire crumbles, scrolling beneath it. Leave him alone. Gil Matthews, the elderly store owner, stepped out front. Boy's trying to work an honest job. More than he managed before. Seems like. The reporter persisted. Sir, sources say you leveraged over $20 million in future commissions. Care to comment on the investigation into your financial dealings? Bradley's phone buzzed in his pocket. Another text from Grace. He'd stopped reading them days ago, after the luxury apartment's eviction notice. The same apartment he'd leased using inflated income statements and forged documents. The apartment where Grace and Madeline now stood among repossessed furniture and canceled credit cards. Brad. Gil's voice cut through his thoughts. Delivery trucks here. Need those shelves stocked before your shift ends. The night shift. Minimum wage plus whatever loose change customers left in the tip jar. A far cry from the commission checks that had funded his meteoric rise and spectacular fall. Across town, Grace stood in the lobby of the Riverside shelter, her designer dress replaced by donated clothes, watching as Madeline curled up on a narrow cot. The teenager's expensive phone, now useless without service, lay dark beside her. Mrs. Thorne? The shelter coordinator approached gently. We've found some openings at the women's transitional housing facility. It's not much, but it's more private than. Thank you, Grace whispered. Her manicured nails, now chipped and growing out, clutching her purse. Inside, past the canceled credit cards and useless store charge accounts, lay a single piece of paper. The eviction notice that had shattered their borrowed fairy tale. Her phone still worked. Richard had kept paying that bill, at least. She stared at the draft message she'd been composing. Dad, we're staying at the Riverside shelter. Mom's crying. Bradley lost everything. Please help us. Across the shelter's common room, a TV mounted in the corner played the evening news. Bradley's face appeared, then footage of the Rolls-Royce being towed from Gil's Gas and Go's parking lot. The reporter's voice cut through the ambient noise. Assets seized. Multiple lawsuits pending. Sources at Apex Innovations confirmed the defense contract, worth nearly $1 billion, was canceled due to internal policy violations. Mom? Madeline's voice trembled. What are we going to do? Grace stared at her reflection in the shelter's window, her carefully maintained highlights growing out, her expensive makeup wearing thin. I don't know, honey. I don't know. Her phone buzzed, another message, this time from Bradley. She almost deleted it without reading, but something made her pause. Grace, please. I'm sorry. I know I messed up. Everything's gone, the car, the house, the credit lines. They're investigating everything. I never meant. Please, just tell me you and Madeline are okay. I'm working at a gas station now. A gas station. I can't. I'll do anything. Just, they don't deserve this. You don't deserve this. I'm sorry. So sorry. Outside the shelter, rain began to fall. Grace watched the drops trace patterns on the window, remembering another rainy night 20 years ago. She and Richard in their tiny first apartment, sharing reheated spaghetti and dreams of the future. He'd worn that same modest smile, driven that same modest car, lived that same modest life. All while building. Mom? Madeline's voice cracked. Should we call Dad? Grace looked at her daughter. Really looked at her for the first time in weeks. The designer clothes were gone, the confident smirk replaced by genuine fear. She was just a scared 14-year-old who'd been dazzled by fool's gold, just like her mother. Yes, Grace whispered, her finger hovering over Richard's number. Yes, I think we should. Meanwhile, Bradley Cooper stocked energy drinks under the flickering fluorescent lights of Gil's Gas and Go, his Rolex ticking away the minutes until minimum wage turned into overtime. Through the window, he could see the empty space where his Rolls-Royce used to park, now occupied by a rusty Toyota that barely started. His phone lay silent on the counter, his calls to Grace and Madeline unanswered. The local news van had finally left, but he knew they'd be back. They always came back, hungry for more footage of the fallen star, the cautionary tale, the man who'd built an empire on borrowed time and borrowed money. Gil shuffled past, keys jingling. Closing time in 10, Brad. Don't forget to mop the floors. Bradley nodded, his perfectly whitened teeth clenched behind a forced smile. Here, at rock bottom, Surrounded by beef jerky and lottery tickets, he finally understood what Richard Thorne had known all along. True worth couldn't be borrowed, leveraged, or faked. His phone lit up with a text. "I'm sorry," he typed to Richard's number, knowing it would probably go unread. "I was arrogant. Please, I'll do anything. Just help them. They don't deserve this." The gas station's lights hummed overhead as Bradley picked up the mop, his Italian leather shoes squeaking on the linoleum. Outside, another news van slowed down, considering whether tonight's shift would make good footage for tomorrow's update on the fall of Bradley Cooper. Jennifer Russell's corner office at Russell & Associates law firm offered a commanding view of the city skyline, but Grace barely noticed it. Her attention was fixed on the stack of documents spread across the polished mahogany desk, papers that were rewriting everything she thought she knew about her 20-year marriage. "These are copies of Mr. Thorne's actual financial statements," Jennifer explained, her voice carrying the precise tone of someone who had delivered life-altering news many times before. "And this," she slid another document forward, "is the prenuptial agreement you signed 2 decades ago." Grace's hands trembled as she picked up the financial statement. The numbers seemed to swim before her eyes. Billions. Not the millions she'd imagined when Bradley had shown her his commission statements. RT Holdings, the mysterious parent company that owned most of Apex Innovations. "All this time, I don't understand," she whispered, her department store clearance blouse feeling suddenly even cheaper. "The house, the car, the lifestyle we lived. Mr. Thorne believes in earning respect, not buying it," Jennifer stated, her tone growing colder. "The prenuptial agreement is quite clear. In the event of divorce, you were to receive a substantial settlement, enough to maintain a very comfortable lifestyle." Grace latched onto this, hope flickering in her eyes. "Were to receive?" "Yes." Jennifer's perfectly manicured nail tapped a specific clause. "However, there's an infidelity clause. Well-documented infidelity, I might add. Security footage from Apex, credit card statements, hotel receipts." She let the implications hang in the air. "Unfortunately, this voids the agreement's benefits. You'll receive only the statutory minimum." Grace collapsed back into her chair, her mind racing through 20 years of memories. Richard's modest suits, his reliable Honda, his carefully maintained image of middle management contentment, all while he quietly controlled an empire worth billions. "You mean?" Her voice cracked. "All this time? The modest lifestyle, the management job?" "Mr. Thorne built his fortune through careful decisions and disciplined choices," Jennifer continued, gathering the documents with practiced efficiency. "He extended that same philosophy to his personal life." Grace's mind flashed to Bradley. His showy Rolls-Royce, his borrowed luxury, his house of cards that had collapsed so spectacularly. "I was such a fool," she whispered. "Yes," Jennifer agreed simply, closing her leather portfolio. "You were." Through the office window, Grace could see the building where she and Richard had first lived, that tiny apartment with the leaky faucet and temperamental heating. She remembered complaining about the noise from the elevated train, while Richard had just smiled and said it was the sound of the city breathing. "Does Madeline know?" Grace asked suddenly. "About her father's. Mr. Thorne will handle that conversation personally." Jennifer's tone softened slightly. "He believes every lesson has its proper time." Grace thought of their daughter, sleeping on a shelter cot, her dreams of private jets and Paris shopping sprees shattered by reality. "He was teaching us all along, wasn't he? About value, about worth." "Mr. Thorne's philosophies on wealth and character are his own," Jennifer replied diplomatically. "I simply handle the legal aspects." A gentle knock interrupted them, Jennifer's assistant with more documents requiring signatures. Grace recognized the logo on some of them. Apex Innovations. Her hand shook as she signed paper after paper, each one stripping away another layer of the life she'd thrown away for Bradley's illusion of success. "One last thing," Jennifer said as Grace stood to leave. "Mr. Thorne asked me to give you this." She handed over a small, worn envelope. Inside, Grace found a photograph. She and Richard on their first date, sharing a pizza at that little corner place they'd eventually take Madeline to celebrate her school achievements. On the back, in Richard's neat handwriting, "Real value isn't in what we have, but in who we are. The tears finally came then, hot and bitter, as Grace understood the magnitude of what she'd lost. Not the money, she'd never really had that, but the trust, the partnership, the shared understanding of what truly mattered. The paralegal will help you with the remaining paperwork, Jennifer said, her professional mask firmly back in place. Mr. Thorne's driver will take you back to the shelter. Grace nodded numbly, clutching the photograph like a lifeline. The paralegal waiting outside, a young woman with kind eyes, gestured for her to follow. As they walked through the firm's elegant hallways, Grace caught her reflection in the polished brass of the elevator doors. Her carefully maintained image had crumbled along with Bradley's empire. The designer dress she'd been so proud of was gone, replaced by clearance rack finds. Her expertly highlighted hair now showed obvious roots, and her previously manicured nails were chipped and broken. Mrs. Thorne? The paralegal's gentle voice broke through her thoughts. There are just a few more signatures needed. The elevator descended, each floor marking another step down from the life she'd thrown away. In her purse, her phone buzzed with another message from Bradley. Probably another desperate apology from his gas station register. She left it unanswered. Outside Jennifer Russell's office building, a modest black sedan waited. Not the luxury car she'd grown accustomed to in her brief time with Bradley, but a well-maintained, practical vehicle. Just like everything else in Richard's carefully constructed world. "Where should I tell the driver to take you?" the paralegal asked. Grace stared at the photograph in her hands, at the young couple sharing a pizza and dreams. "The Riverside Shelter," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to my daughter." As the car pulled away from the curb, Grace watched the city scroll past. The same streets she'd once walked with Richard, planning their future together. She'd thought those dreams modest then, limited. Now she understood they had been anything but. The truth had emerged, and with it, the full weight of her choices. Not just the loss of material comfort, but the shattering of something far more precious. Trust built over 20 years, carefully maintained like everything else in Richard's world. The car turned toward the shelter, and Grace tucked the photograph carefully into her purse. She had started this journey in designer heels, chasing what she thought was success. She would end it in clearance rack shoes, understanding at last what real value meant, too late to change what she had lost. The small cafe on Maple Street hadn't changed in the 20 years since Richard had first discovered it. The same brass bell chimed as he pushed open the door, the same warm scent of fresh-baked muffins and coffee filling the air. He'd chosen this place deliberately for his meeting with Madeline, neutral ground, filled with memories from happier times. His daughter was already there, hunched over a table in the corner. Gone were the designer clothes she'd flaunted during her brief time in Bradley's orbit. Instead, she wore a simple sweater that had clearly come from a thrift store, the sleeves slightly frayed at the cuff. Her previously perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, much like Grace used to wear hers in the early days. Richard ordered 2 hot chocolates, their traditional father-daughter drink, and made his way to the table. Madeline didn't look up as he approached, her fingers tracing patterns in the condensation on the window beside her. "Thank you for coming," Richard said softly, placing 1 hot chocolate in front of her. He noticed her nails, once professionally manicured, were now bare and bitten to the quick. Madeline's eyes remained fixed on the window, watching people pass by outside. A woman walked past in designer boots, similar to ones Madeline had briefly owned during what she now called the Bradley time. Her throat tightened visibly. "Why didn't you tell us you were rich?" she finally whispered, her voice barely audible above the cafe's ambient noise. The question held none of the accusation he'd expected, only a profound weariness that no 14-year-old should have to carry. Richard took a careful sip of his hot chocolate, buying time to form his response. "Would it have made me less of a loser?" he asked quietly, not unkindly. The word hung between them, a reminder of that day in the driveway when his daughter had high-fived Bradley Cooper and dismissed her father's entire existence. Madeline flinched as if he'd struck her. A tear escaped, tracking down her cheek. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I was stupid." Bradley made everything seem so exciting, so special. The house, the car, the promises of Paris. Her voice cracked. "I thought that's what success looked like." what happiness looked like. Money shows who people really are, sweetheart. Richard reached across the table, but stopped short of touching her hand, unsure if she was ready for that. It doesn't make them better or worse. It just reveals their true character. Finally, Madeline looked up, her eyes red but clear. The kids at school. She swallowed hard. They're all laughing at me now, calling me a gold digger's daughter, posting old photos of me bragging about Bradley's house, about Paris. Fresh tears welled up. Jessica Martinez, you know, Patricia's niece? She was my best friend since 3rd grade. Yesterday, she told everyone I was just like my mom, that we were both. She broke down then, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. This time, Richard did reach out, laying his hand gently over hers. The noise of the cafe continued around them, the hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of other patrons, the clinking of cups against saucers. Life going on, as it always did, while private worlds crumbled and rebuilt themselves in corner booths. Your mother, Richard began carefully, but Madeline cut him off. She cries every night at the shelter, she whispered. When she thinks I'm asleep, she keeps looking at old photos on her phone, pictures of us, from before. Real pictures, not the fake ones with Bradley. She pulled her hand back to wipe her eyes. Why did you live like that, Dad? If you had all this money, why did we live so normally? Richard watched a young couple walk past the window, probably around the age he and Grace had been when they first started out. The woman was wearing a sensible coat that had seen better days, but she was laughing at something her partner had said, their hands clasped tightly together. What do you see when you look at them? He asked Madeline, nodding toward the couple. She turned to look, her brow furrowing slightly. They look happy. Are they happy because of what they're wearing? What they're driving? Where they're about to go have lunch? Understanding began to dawn in Madeline's eyes. No, she said slowly. They're happy because they're together. Because they're laughing at some private joke or special memory. Just like we used to be, Richard said softly. Remember when we'd spend Saturday mornings in the garage, working on those little craft projects? Or when we'd have pizza picnics in the living room during thunderstorms? You'd always let me have the last slice, Madeline whispered, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. And Mom would pretend to be mad about the crumbs in the carpet, but she'd end up sitting on the floor with us, telling stories about when you were both young. Those moments, Richard said, had nothing to do with money. They were real because we were real with each other. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Bradley's world looked exciting because it was all show. But show isn't the same as substance. Show doesn't last. Madeline stared into her untouched hot chocolate. I miss our old house, she admitted. I miss my regular clothes and my regular life and... Her voice broke again. I miss you, Dad. The real you. Not the loser I thought you were, or the billionaire you turned out to be. Just my dad. For the first time since that day in the driveway, Richard saw his daughter, really saw her. Not the temporary princess Bradley had created, not the humbled teenager in thrift store clothes, but his Madeline, the girl who used to fall asleep reading books he'd recommended, who'd spent hours learning to braid her own hair because she wanted to be independent, who'd once saved her allowance for 3 months to buy Grace a birthday present instead of the video game she'd wanted for herself. I'm still here, he said gently. Still the same dad who taught you to ride a bike, and helped you with your science projects and cheered embarrassingly loud at your school plays, even after what I said, what I did. Her voice was small, uncertain. Even after, he confirmed. Being hurt by someone's choices doesn't mean you stop loving them. It just means you have to find a new way forward. Madeline's fingers curled around her hot chocolate mug, seeking its warmth. I don't deserve it, she whispered. Your forgiveness, your love, any of it. Love isn't about deserving, Richard replied. It's about choosing. Every day, we make choices about who we want to be and how we want to treat the people in our lives. He gestured to the window, where more people hurried past. Some of those people out there probably have more money than they can spend. Others are struggling to pay rent. But their worth, their real worth, isn't in their bank accounts. It's in their choices, their actions, their treatment of others. Finally, Madeline took a sip of her hot chocolate. A small action, but to Richard, It felt like the first crack in a wall of shame and regret she'd built around herself. "Dad?" she asked after a moment. Do you think, do you think I could come home? Not to the big house Bradley promised, but home. Our real home." The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Richard looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not just the mistake she'd made, but the person she was trying to become. The security guard at Apex Innovations headquarters shifted uncomfortably as he escorted Grace through the lobby. Her appearance was a stark contrast to her last visit to the building, when she'd swept through on Bradley's arm, dressed in borrowed luxury. Now, her department store clearance items hung loosely on her frame, evidence of weight lost to stress and shame. The elevator ride to Richard's floor was silent, each floor's soft chime marking another step toward a conversation she'd both dreaded and longed for. The security guard's presence reminded her that she was no longer family here, just another visitor requiring an escort. Richard's office was exactly as she remembered it from the few times she'd visited over the years. The same modest furniture, the same family photos on the walls, the same view of the city skyline. Only now she understood that the modesty had been a choice, not a limitation. He was standing at the window when she entered, his reflection in the glass showing the same unremarkable suit he'd always worn. How many times had she complained about his lack of ambition in his clothing choices? How many times had she compared him unfavorably to Bradley's $1,000 suits and designer watches? "Richard," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned, and Grace felt the full weight of 20 years of shared history in his gaze. The security guard quietly withdrew, closing the door behind him. "You've lost weight," Richard observed, his tone neutral. Grace's hands twisted together nervously. "The shelter's food isn't exactly gourmet." She attempted a weak smile that faded quickly. "Though I suppose I should be grateful to have food at all, after what we... Why are you here, Grace?" The direct question caught her off guard, though it shouldn't have. Richard had always preferred directness to dancing around issues, another quality she'd once mistaken for simplicity rather than strength. "I was blind," she admitted, sinking into one of the visitor chairs. "Completely, utterly blind. Seduced by the flash and show. Bradley made everything seem so exciting, so special." She trailed off, realizing she was echoing their daughter's words from the cafe, words Richard had no doubt heard just days ago. "You gave us a beautiful life," she continued, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "And I was too stupid to see it, too caught up in what I thought we were missing to appreciate what we had." Richard's expression remained carefully neutral as he settled into his chair behind the desk. The same desk she'd once called depressingly ordinary during an argument about his career choices. Now she noticed the quality of the wood, the subtle elegance of its design. Like everything else in Richard's world, its value lay in substance rather than show. "No, Grace," he finally said, his voice carrying years of accumulated wisdom and hurt. "I gave us a real life. You wanted a show." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. Memories flashed through her mind. Richard teaching Madeline to ride a bike while Grace complained about the embarrassingly common neighborhood they lived in. Family game nights she'd gradually stopped attending because Bradley had invited her to cocktail parties with important people. The simple silver necklace Richard had given her for their 15th anniversary, now lost in the chaos of her failed attempt at upgrading her life, that she'd worn only once because it wasn't impressive enough. "Can we?" Her voice trembled as she forced the words out. "Can we try again?" Richard's silence filled the room, heavy with 2 decades of shared history and one spectacular betrayal. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, careful. "Sometimes broken trust is like a mirror, Grace. You can fix it, but you'll always see the cracks." Grace's hands clenched in her lap, the chipped remains of her once perfect manicure a testament to her fall from borrowed grace. "I keep thinking about our first apartment," she whispered. "Remember how the heat would never work properly in winter? We used to huddle under that old blanket your grandmother made, drinking cheap coffee and planning our future." "I remember," Richard said quietly. "You used to say we were rich in everything that mattered. When did I forget that?" The question wasn't really directed at Richard. More at herself, at the universe, at whatever twist of fate had led her to throw away substance for sparkle. When did I start measuring wealth in designer labels instead of shared laughter? When did I become someone who could look at 20 years of love and partnership and trade it for a Rolls-Royce and promises of Paris? Richard's voice held no accusation, just a deep, tired understanding. Grace felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but made no move to wipe them away. The woman I was then, in our first apartment, planning our future, she would hate who I became, who I let myself become. The past can't be changed, Grace. Only the future can be shaped. Is there? She swallowed hard. Is there a future here? For us? Richard stood and walked to the window again, looking out over the city they'd built their life in. You know what the hardest part was? He asked quietly. Not the betrayal itself. Not even watching you and Madeline choose Bradley's illusion over our reality. It was realizing that if I'd simply told you about the money years ago, you might have stayed. And then I'd never have known if you loved me or what I could give you. The words hung in the air between them, each one a weight pressing down on Grace's shoulders. She thought of Bradley, now working night shifts at a gas station, his borrowed glory crumbled to dust. She thought of their daughter, humbled and hurting, learning harsh lessons about value and character far too young. I loved you, she whispered. The real you. I just lost sight of what real meant. Richard turned back to face her, his expression softening slightly. The mirror's still broken, Grace. The cracks will always be there. I know, she nodded, rising from her chair on shaky legs. I know. Months had passed since that day in Richard's office, each one bringing small changes, subtle shifts in the landscape of their broken and healing relationships. The pizzeria on 4th Street, the same one where Richard had first taken Grace on their second date, where they'd later celebrated Madeline's elementary school graduation, buzzed with its usual weekend energy as Richard sat across from his daughter. Madeline was different now, the change visible in more than just her clothing or appearance. The proud tilt of her head that had once spoken of borrowed arrogance had been replaced by something quieter, more genuine. She'd started volunteering at the local animal shelter, spending her weekends cleaning cages and walking dogs instead of dreaming about private jets and Paris shopping sprees. I'm sorry, Dad, she said, not for the first time. But each repetition carried its own weight of understanding. For everything. But I'm glad I learned this lesson now instead of later. Richard nodded, studying the young woman his daughter was becoming. The shelter work had given her hands new calluses, her heart new purpose. Just yesterday, she'd spent her birthday money, earned from her part-time job at the shelter, on supplies for a litter of rescued kittens instead of the designer bag she would have coveted mere months ago. The conversation paused as their pizzas arrived. Still the same recipe after all these years, still served on the same red and white checked tablecloths. Some things, Richard reflected, were valuable precisely because they didn't change. Mom called yesterday, Madeline mentioned carefully, testing the waters of this still sensitive topic. She's settling in well in Arizona. The teaching position, she sounds happy. More like her old self. Richard absorbed this information silently. Grace's decision to return to teaching, her first passion, before ambition and Bradley's influence had corrupted her priorities, had been her first step toward rebuilding her own identity. The move to Arizona had been necessary, a clean break from the shadows of her mistakes. The pizzeria's door chimed, and Patricia Martinez walked in with her teenage son Diego. The boy had Richard's quiet determination in his eyes, the same look Richard had worn during his own early days of building something from nothing. Mr. Thorne. Diego's face lit up as he spotted them. He hurried over, already pulling a travel chest set from his backpack. I've been practicing that strategy you showed me last week. Ready for our chess match? The boy grinned, his enthusiasm infectious as he began setting up the board. Richard had started mentoring him after noticing his keen interest in business and strategy, seeing in Diego's earnest determination echoes of his own younger self. Winner buys ice cream, Madeline chimed in, and Richard's heart warmed at the sound of her old smile in her voice. Not the practiced, photo-ready smile she'd worn during the Bradley days, but her real one. Slightly crooked, entirely genuine. As they played, Richard observed the subtle dynamics around the table. Diego's careful consideration of each move, Madeline's gentle teasing when he took too long to decide, Patricia's proud smile as she watched her son engage with the game. This was wealth that couldn't be measured in bank accounts or stock portfolios. The game progressed, each move accompanied by conversation about their weeks, their plans, their hopes. Diego's latest chess move showed promise, making Richard lean forward with genuine interest. "Mr. Thorne," Diego asked during a particularly challenging sequence, "do you think I could intern at Apex next summer? I've been reading about business strategies, and I thought maybe—" "We'll discuss it," Richard smiled, recognizing the same hunger for knowledge he'd once possessed. "Though you'll have to start in the mailroom, just like I did." Patricia exchanged a knowing look with Richard. Her son didn't need to know yet that the mailroom story was part of Richard's carefully constructed narrative. The lesson of starting from the bottom, however, was real enough. Through the pizzeria's window, Richard caught a glimpse of a familiar Rolls-Royce driving past. Not Bradley's, which had long since been repossessed, but one belonging to another local business owner. Once, such a sight would have triggered tension around the table. Now, Madeline didn't even notice it, too engrossed in helping Diego analyze his next move. "Checkmate in 3 moves," Diego announced proudly, pointing out his strategy. "Ice cream's on me then," Richard conceded, watching his daughter's face light up at the familiar tradition. She was no longer the materialistic teen she'd been, but rather a thoughtful young woman who'd learned the true value of things. As they gathered their belongings to head to the ice cream shop next door, Richard reflected on the journey that had brought them here. His wealth had indeed revealed true characters, broken false relationships, and ultimately paved the way for authentic ones. Looking at Madeline now, laughing with Diego about his victory, Richard knew he'd made the right choice all those years ago, and again during the recent months of painful but necessary change. The chess pieces carefully packed away until next time. In the end, Richard thought, watching his daughter hold the door for an elderly couple entering the restaurant, this was worth more than all the Rolls-Royces in the world. Epilogue. 5 years later. The autumn wind scattered leaves across the parking lot of Gill's Gas & Go, where Bradley Cooper wiped down the windows of a customer's car with practiced efficiency. His once manicured hands had grown calloused over the years, his designer suits replaced by a uniform bearing the name Brad in faded embroidery. The Rolex he'd once flaunted had long since been sold to cover legal fees, replaced by a simple digital watch that beeped to signal the end of his shift. "Orders ready for the monthly safety inspection, Brad," Gill called from inside. The elderly store owner had kept Bradley on despite everything, perhaps seeing something redeemable in the fallen executive's struggle to rebuild his life from scratch. Bradley nodded, gathering his cleaning supplies. 5 years had etched new lines in his face, each one a reminder of his spectacular fall. The defense contract debacle had become a cautionary tale, studied in business schools and ethics seminars across the country. His name appeared in textbook chapters about corporate fraud and leverage deals gone wrong. The bell above the store's door chimed as a sleek Tesla pulled up to the pump. Bradley's heart clenched when he recognized Diego Martinez behind the wheel, no longer the teenage chess enthusiast, but a rising junior executive at Apex Innovations. The boy he'd once dismissed as Patricia Martinez's charity case nephew had earned his position through merit and hard work, climbing the corporate ladder the way Richard Thorne once had. "Fill it up, please," Diego said politely, not a hint of recognition or judgment in his voice. He turned back to his passenger, a young intern who was frantically taking notes. "So as I was saying, the Cooper case is a perfect example of why we emphasize sustainable growth over flashy deals." Bradley kept his head down as he filled the Tesla's battery, remembering his own meteoric rise and catastrophic fall. His last commission check from the defense contract still haunted him, the one that had bounced, triggering a cascade of loan defaults that had stripped away everything he'd borrowed and leveraged. Across town, in the teacher's lounge of Desert View High School in Phoenix, Grace Thorne. She'd kept the name, a reminder of both what she'd lost and what she'd learned, graded papers during her lunch break. Her department store clothes were neat but modest, her wedding ring long since replaced by the simple silver band she'd worn during her first years of teaching, before ambition and Bradley's influence had led her astray. "Miss Thorne?" A student appeared in the doorway. I was hoping you could look at my college application essay. It's about learning from mistakes and second chances. Grace smiled, gesturing for the student to sit. Teaching high school economics had become her redemption, her way of sharing hard-learned lessons about value and character with young minds. Her classroom walls displayed not designer labels or luxury car posters, but quotes about financial responsibility and ethical decision-making. The Cooper case featured prominently in her curriculum, though few knew she had lived it firsthand. Her phone buzzed with a text from Madeline. Dad's foundation approved the shelter's expansion grant. We're breaking ground next month. Coming to Arizona for Thanksgiving? Grace's heart warmed at her daughter's excitement. After completing her degree in nonprofit management, Madeline had transformed her volunteer work at the animal shelter into a career in charitable organization leadership. The materialistic teenager who had once dreamed of private jets had grown into a woman who measured wealth by lives improved rather than dollars spent. At Apex Innovations headquarters, Richard Thorne's office remained modestly furnished, though he'd finally allowed his true identity as owner of RT Holdings to become public knowledge. The revelation had come gradually, after a business magazine investigation had uncovered the truth. The story of a billionaire who chose to live modestly and learn people's true characters had generated its own headlines. Patricia Martinez, now Chief Operating Officer, entered with a stack of reports. The latest numbers from the foundation, Mr. Thorne. Diego's team has identified 3 more promising investment opportunities in sustainable technology. Richard nodded, studying the documents. The Thorne Foundation, established in the aftermath of the Cooper incident, had become a major force in ethical business development and education. Its flagship program, which provided mentorship and seed funding to young entrepreneurs who demonstrated both business acumen and ethical judgment, had already launched dozens of successful ventures. And the Gills Gas and Go acquisition? Richard asked quietly. Complete, Patricia confirmed. Though as requested, Gil Matthews will retain operational control and all current employees will keep their positions. She paused. Including Mr. Cooper. Richard's lips curved slightly. Bradley's fall had been spectacular, but his gradual acceptance of his new life, and his quiet efforts to make amends through community service and speaking to business students about ethics, had not gone unnoticed. The Foundation's latest initiative sat on Richard's desk, a partnership with Grace's high school to develop a curriculum about ethical business practices and personal finance. The irony wasn't lost on him. His ex-wife now taught future business leaders about the very principles whose violation had cost her marriage. In the parking lot of a local diner, Bradley's ancient Toyota, bought with carefully saved gas station wages, refused to start. As he popped the hood, a familiar Rolls-Royce pulled into the space beside him. Richard Thorne stepped out, dressed in the same kind of modest suit he'd always worn. Need a jump? Richard asked, already reaching for his cables. Bradley's hands shook slightly as he accepted the help. Richard, thank you. For not pressing charges back then. For letting Gil keep me on after the acquisition. Sometimes, Richard interrupted gently, the hardest lesson is learning the true value of things. It took me years to build what you tried to acquire in months. The difference is, I built it on substance, not show. As they connected the batteries, Bradley noticed a folder on Richard's passenger seat. Paperwork for the Thorne Foundation's latest venture, a program to help reformed white-collar offenders rebuild their lives through ethical business practices. There's an opening, Richard said casually, following Bradley's gaze. Entry-level position, working with at-risk youth, teaching them about financial responsibility, the real meaning of success. He paused. 5 years is a long time to learn from one's mistakes. Bradley's throat tightened as he understood the offer. Not of redemption, exactly, but of a chance to turn his cautionary tale into something meaningful. In Phoenix, Grace finished grading her last paper and picked up a framed photo on her desk. Not the glossy shots from her brief time in Bradley's world, but a simple snapshot from 25 years ago. She and Richard sharing pizza on their second date. Her lesson plan for tomorrow covered the dangers of leveraged debt and the difference between authentic success and borrowed glory. The sun set over Gills Gas and Go as Bradley locked up for the night. Through the window, he could see his story featured in a business ethics textbook left behind by a customer. his rise and fall now teaching future generations about the price of pride and the cost of shortcuts. Madeline's shelter, now the largest no-kill facility in 3 states, prepared for its expansion. Her office wall held 2 photos. One of her younger self high-fiving Bradley Cooper beside his Rolls-Royce, the other of her recent graduation, where she delivered a keynote speech about measuring success not in possessions but in positive impact. And in Richard's modest home office, a chess set remained permanently set up by the window. Diego's son, just learning the game, would visit tomorrow for his first lesson, carrying forward a tradition of mentorship built on substance rather than show. The true value of things, they had all learned in their own ways, could never be measured in designer labels or luxury cars. It lay in the quiet dignity of honest work, the slow building of authentic relationships, and the understanding that real wealth wasn't found in what you had, but in who you chose to be. Bradley closed the gas station's lights, the neon sign flickering out behind him. Tomorrow would bring another shift of honest work, another day of quiet redemption. His borrowed glory had long since faded, but in its place, something more valuable had begun to grow. Understanding, humility, and the slow, steady work of rebuilding not a fortune, but a life worth living. Grace turned out her classroom lights, her students' essays about ethical business practices tucked under her arm. The designer dreams had crumbled, but the teacher she'd been before, and had found her way back to being, stood straighter, taught with conviction earned through hard experience. And somewhere between them all, the lessons of value and character, of substance over show, continued to ripple outward, touching lives in ways that no amount of leveraged wealth could ever match. Richard Thorne's modest Honda, still his preferred vehicle despite his now public status as a billionaire, pulled into his driveway. The house remained the same, neither downsized nor upgraded, a testament to the principle that had guided him all along. True worth wasn't found in possessions, but in purpose. The story of the silent billionaire, the fallen salesman, and the family that learned the hard way about real value had become more than a cautionary tale. It had become a legacy, passed down through mentorship programs, business ethics classes, and quiet acts of redemption. As night fell over the city, lights flickered on in homes both modest and grand. In a gas station, a former executive stocked shelves with careful precision. In a Phoenix classroom, a teacher prepared lessons about authentic success. In an animal shelter office, a young woman planned ways to make the world better rather than more impressive. And in a quiet study, a billionaire who had never needed to flaunt his wealth moved another chess piece, teaching another generation about the true meaning of value. The autumn wind scattered more leaves across the city, carrying with it the whispered lessons of pride and redemption, of loss and reconstruction, of the enduring truth that real wealth couldn't be borrowed, leveraged, or displayed. It could only be earned, one quiet choice at a time. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.